There is a character in the Bible who has never killed anyone. He didn't burn down cities. He did not drown the world in a global flood. He didn't slaughter the firstborn of an entire country overnight. He did not give orders to exterminate tribes, along with women, old people, and babies. This character's name is Satan. And now guess who, in the same book, personally did everything that I just listed? Right, God. Let's check the original source. Satan in the Garden of Eden did not tell Eve a single word of lies. Check the text yourself. He promised that the day she tasted the fruit, her eyes would open and people would become like gods, knowing good and evil. That's exactly what happened. But God had previously told Adam something else. The day you eat from the tree, you will die. But Adam lived peacefully for another 900 years after that. In fact, one of the two characters in this scene was outright lying, and this was not the one whom the church later called the father of lies for 2,000 years. And that's where an extremely uncomfortable conversation begins, which theologians have been trying to fill up with long sermons for centuries. If we count the number of corpses impartially, then the bloodiest, cruelest, and most merciless character in the Bible is not the devil. This is the main character. Moreover, we are not talking about one controversial chapter, which can be attributed to translation difficulties or allegory. It's about the whole text, from Genesis to the Apocalypse. The list of victims grows with each book, and the name of Satan almost never appears next to the actual violence. So maybe it's time to ask ourselves, who do we really call evil? The one who kills millions, or the one whom the system just conveniently blames for it? Have you noticed that a person almost never blames the whole structure? There is always one convenient culprit in our minds. We blame a bad boss, not a toxic company model. One particular dictator, not the silent majority that created him. One fallen angel, not the author of the world in which this angel even got the technical opportunity to appear. The Bible is perhaps the first and most successful document in the history of mankind that has taught us to automatically remove responsibility from the main character by assigning blame to a minor character. And if this trick has been working flawlessly for 3,000 years, it's worth asking, isn't it being turned on you right now? You will be surprised how quickly this ancient formula begins to be recognized in our daily lives.
The standard answer, which any of us has heard since childhood, sounds simple and understandable. The Creator created an ideal world, but one of the higher angels became arrogant, rebelled against God out of envy, was disgracefully overthrown, and since then has been taking revenge, tempting humanity to evil. God is a monopoly on love, order, and justice. Satan is chaos, destruction, and lies. The story of the fall is a story about freedom of choice, where a person simply listened to the wrong advisor. The scheme is perfect. It fits perfectly into the Sunday school lesson format and completely removes the need for us to think further. There is absolute good, there is absolute evil, the case is closed, we can go light a candle. This version is incredibly convenient because it explains any suffering without making you doubt who really runs this world. Wars, incurable diseases, orphanages, earthquakes, your own lousy decisions, all this can be easily attributed to an invisible, insidious enemy operating behind the scenes. This mental model has penetrated our culture so deeply that it has begun to work even outside of religion, as the standard mask of the dark side in any moral conflict, from Hollywood movies to political debates on television. But as soon as you open the original source itself and not its sugary retelling, this scheme begins to crack at the seams. Let's look at the bare facts, not at church interpretations. The global flood is God's conscious decision to drown all life on the planet, including infants and innocent animals, simply because people have become corrupt. Sodom and Gomorrah, total burning of cities along with all the inhabitants. Egyptian executions are deliberate killing of the firstborn in every Egyptian family, including babies in cradles, for the sins of the Pharaoh. Moreover, if you read carefully, Pharaoh would have been happy to let the Jews go, but each time God himself forcibly hardened his heart to show his power. Now open the book of Job, and you will see a shocking thing. Satan appears there not as God's sworn enemy, but as a legitimate member of his heavenly court. In the original Hebrew text, it is not a proper name at all, but a position, ha-satan, which literally translates as accuser or prosecutor. He comes to the work meeting with other sons of God, and it is God himself who first draws the prosecutor's attention to Job, as if provoking his servant. As a result, God personally makes a bet with Satan and gives him an official license for violence. The destruction of Job's household, the brutal murder of all his children, the leprosy that disfigured his body, all this happens under a contract approved by the supreme heavenly chancellery. The prosecutor here is not the author of evil, he is just a hired executor who was given an order from above. Or take the story of Abraham. God personally orders a father to tie his own son to an altar and stab him to death to test his loyalty. There's no Satan anywhere near. There is only a frightened child, a father with a blade at his throat, and a voice from above who declares at the last moment, "Okay, forget it. It was just a test." If any other character in the story had suggested such psychological sadism, we would have called him a monster without hesitation. So who in this story really makes the final decision about the suffering of the innocent? And when exactly did Satan manage to become the main villain if all the most terrible, bloody and nightmarish scenes of the Bible do without his direct participation?
It is physically unbearable for the human psyche to live in a world where the source of absolute power is both omnipotent and kind, and at the same time allows wild suffering for no apparent reason. Psychologists call this faith in a just world, the basic need of our brain to think that everything is happening for a cause. Bad people are punished, and only good things happen to good people. When this illusion collides with reality, where the righteous are dying of cancer and cities are being wiped off the face of the earth, our consciousness has two paths. The first is to admit that the Creator is either not in control of the situation or is outright cruel. But it's too expensive and scary. It completely destroys the picture of the world. Therefore, the brain chooses the second way. It finds the culprit next to the government, but not in it itself. This is how the technical function of the devil is born. This is not a theological character, it is a purely psychological fuse that protects the faith system from a short circuit called, if God is so merciful, then why is there so much hell in the world? We evaluate actions not by the fact of harm done, but by position in the hierarchy. Psychologists call this the legitimacy effect of violence. If violence is committed by a recognized authority, the brain automatically comes up with an excuse for it. Well, then it was necessary, a divine plan. But if someone from below contradicts the authority, it is immediately declared pure evil, even if its actual harm is zero. Think of Stanley Milgram's famous experiment. There, ordinary, mentally healthy people were ready to electrocute a stranger behind a wall, reaching deadly voltage levels. Do you know why? Not because they were sadistic, but because a man in a white coat with the status of a scientist calmly told them, "Go on, I'll take responsibility for myself." Authority completely disables a person's function of personal moral evaluation. It is this biological bug that makes the Bible reader calmly swallow the genocide of the flood and the execution of infants, but sincerely shudder at the mention of one rebellious angel. If we trace the history of Satan through the texts, we will see the evolution of the official. In the early books of the Old Testament, Satan is not a proper name. He has no horns, hooves, and an army of demons. He is a faithful servant of the system. The radical reversal occurs much later, in the period between the Testaments, when Jewish culture is closely confronted with the Persian Empire and their religion, Zoroastrianism. That's where the world was built on a rigid dualism, the equal struggle of the God of light and the God of darkness. It is then that apocryphal literature, for example the Book of Enoch, hastily completes the biography of the biblical opponent, invents a story about a riot, a fall from heaven, and a motive for personal revenge. It was pure political technology and editing of the text for a specific task. How to keep the image of the all-good God if your people are constantly being robbed, captured, and your holy temple is being destroyed? Answer: we urgently need to take out the entire source of evil out of the brackets of divine responsibility, give it a name, an army, and make it a scapegoat. It is vital for any centralized government to have an external enemy. So far, the horned rebel outside the throne is to blame for all the troubles. No one dares to ask uncomfortable questions to the throne itself. Do you think this myth has remained in the ancient scrolls? Look around. This template is driving us right now.
Take any medieval chronicle of the Inquisition. The church, which tortured people, burned them alive in squares, and massacred entire cities of heretics, officially acted in the name of absolute goodness, love, and the salvation of souls. And a scientist or philosopher who simply offered to translate the Bible into an understandable language was declared a servant of Satan and destroyed. Physical, tangible cruelty came from the institution of power, but the stigma of the source of evil was given to those who dared to challenge this power. The same thing happened of the Salem witch trials. The real harm was caused by judges and a mad crowd who hanged women based on forced denunciations, but the culprit in the archives is not the court, but the mythical devil. Look at modern corporations. No one calls a system that, for the sake of a beautiful quarterly report and the profits of top managers, fires 10,000 employees in one day, destroying their lives, evil. This is called optimization, restructuring, and market necessity. But if an ordinary employee secretly downloads documents about the machinations of this corporation and leaks them to journalists, he is declared a traitor, an enemy, a spy, and a destructive element. The damage from the system is thousands of broken destinies. Harm from a whistleblower is a blow to the boss's reputation, but it is his that the system appoints the main villain. Or take environmental disasters. When a pipe bursts at a giant concern and millions of tons of oil spill into the ocean, destroying the ecosystem for hundreds of kilometers, the press service calls this a technical force majeure and an unfortunate accident. The corporation pays the fine and moves on. But if an activist chains himself to the fence of their factory to draw attention to this disaster, he is branded on the evening news as a dangerous radical, extremist, and terrorist who paralyzed the work of the enterprise. They still sell us the figure of one bad guy to whitewash the crime of the entire structure. If we discard the religious decorations, we will see a fundamental blueprint for assembling absolutely any ideology and management system on the planet. Whoever holds a monopoly on violence, whether it's the state, a corporation, or a family patriarch, gives himself unlimited moral credit by default. All his punitive actions automatically receive noble names like state necessity, protection of national interests, or restoring order, or education. But anyone who questions this monopoly, a dissident, a rebel, a whistleblower, or just a dissenter, automatically receives the label of a mortal threat and an enemy of society, even if his only weapon is a spoken word. In the global economy, this works flawlessly. The model that structurally breeds enormous inequality and poverty is respectfully called the free market. But a person who publicly points a finger at this injustice is instantly branded a populist and class agitator. It's the same in culture. Institutions that have controlled for centuries what you can think, how to dress, and who to love are reverently referred to as age-old traditions and spiritual bonds. But anyone who proposes to revise these dogmas to fit the realities of the 21st century is declared a destroyer of values and a degenerate. Even at the state level, a political regime can keep its own population in fear, isolation, and poverty for decades, and this will be officially called stability, security, and a special historical path. But a citizen who comes to the square with a cardboard poster just to ask why is that is immediately declared an extremist, a foreign agent, and an enemy of the people. His fault is not that he caused harm, his fault is that he encroached on the architecture of power.
Go even lower, to the level of an ordinary family. The totalitarian parent who for years suppressed the child, broke his personality, screamed and kept him in eternal fear and guilt, in the official family legend will forever remain a strict but loving father who wished you well. But if this child dares to say out loud once in adulthood, "I was unbearably sick of your upbringing," the family system will instantly attack him with a stigma. You are an ungrateful creature who selfishly digs into the past instead of saying thank you. The template is perfect and unchangeable. The villain is almost never the one who causes the maximum objective harm. The villain is always the one who threatens the structure that produces and controls this harm. The scale of the devil is always strictly proportional to the scale of the power that this devil owes his existence to whitewash. And now all the puzzle elements snap into place. The argument God versus Satan is not a battle of good and evil at all. This is the oldest and most vivid illustration in the history of mankind of how the legitimization of power works. The top has a sacred right to any violence because it is she who writes the dictionary and calls her actions order. And those who disagree don't even have the right to remain silent because their doubt is automatically translated as evil. If you expect me to make a primitive conclusion in the end, along the lines of religion is just a fairy tale, God is bad, and Satan is the secret hero of history, then you are deeply mistaken. That's not the point at all. Romanticizing Lucifer is just as stupid. The point is different. The very category of villain in this story does not work in terms of the amount of bloodshed, but solely in terms of position in the hierarchy. Whoever sits at the very top is in complete control of the narrative, and the first word he writes into this narrative is the name of the one who dared to ask the question, "Why should we obey you?" Look at how the very structure of the biblical narrative proves this. God has a detailed biography, character, goals, long dialogues, and covenants with entire nations. Satan has nothing at all in the original text. No childhood story, no clear motivation, no deep inner world. He is hardly described because he is not an independent hero of the conflict. He is just an official side element of someone else's story about absolute power. He was retroactively given the role of the main antagonist so that the story would have one convenient villain instead of a million uncomfortable questions. Holy Scripture does not end with the victory of good over evil in the beautiful sense that we were told in children's books. It ends with the absolute victory of power over the issue. In the Apocalypse, Satan is not defeated by logic, arguments, or a righteous judgment. He was defeated by the final verdict handed down by the very authority that was the direct party to the conflict and the judge in his own case. And if this debriefing made you tense up inside for even a second, it wasn't because you suddenly believed in the devil or doubted dogmas. This happened because your brain instantly recognized this matrix. Because this mechanism of legitimizing violence has not been lying on the dusty shelves of ancient history. He's working on the morning news right now, in your CEO's office, on government slogans, and on family disputes. It's just that this mechanism no longer has horns and hooves. Now it has an official position, a leather chair, a sign on the door, and an army of press secretaries who will explain every atrocity of the system to you in one simple word: necessity.
The Bible is not a guide to finding absolute evil somewhere in the underworld. This is a mirror that has been mercilessly showing humanity the same fact for 3,000 years. The authorities almost never punish for harm done. She severely punishes for trying to ask about the causes of this harm. The question that you should take with you after this video and think carefully in silence is, in your own life, who is really the villain? The one who's hurting you, or the one who first found the courage to say out loud that this pain exists?